Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamu alaikum, everyone. We will be starting the event now. Jazakallah khair for everyone for coming in today. My name is Anusha Malik, and I'll be moderating the event. We have Sister Duaa Haggag from FYI and Sheikh Imam Asfer here with us today to talk about mental health in Ramadan. Just to give you all a little bit of a background, I've also been brought up in the IFM Muslim community for a while now, and my background is also in social work, so I'm really excited to be in sharing space today with Sister Dua and to learn with her like we all are. Just to give a little bit of background about Sister Dua, Sister Dua Haggag is a community educator with the Family and Youth Institute. She holds a master's degree in counseling with a dual certificate in school and community counseling. She currently works in private practice as a child, adolescent, and family therapist at Silent Sunlight Counseling. Her interests include group, play, and art therapy. At both the local and national level, Sister Dua uses her love of storytelling to integrate Islamic psychotherapy in her parent and youth development workshops. She served as the content editor for the first comprehensive Islamic health curriculum for adolescents and has also authored a number of discussion guides to help parents use movies as powerful education and mentorship tools. Sister Dua has been a community organizer for more than 15 years. Her passion is working with parents, mentors, and schools to create safe, affirming spaces for youth to discover and establish their identity. She actively mentors Muslim youth and families through the Muslim American Society, also known as MAS. So, mashallah, Sister Dua has a really long list of accomplishments, and we're really lucky to have her today. Alhamdulillah. So, I think a lot of us know that the topic today is about Ramadan and mental health. And so, just to get into it, Sister Dua, the first question I want to ask is, as everyone heard in her bio, it said that you really like storytelling, right? You really like development and also Islamic psychotherapy. So, can you just share with us how you first became passionate about these things and why you feel like it's important to combine these in your work?
Sure. It's okay if I repeat what I said at the youth lecture,
Yeah,
right?
sure.
um, so I had shared in the previous lecture with the youth one of my favorite authors. Her name is Patty Dye. She does a lot of self-help work and really inner work. And there's this quote that I really like that she says often. The shortest distance between two people is a story. And I really love this. I really love this quote because that's how we connect with human beings. That's how we connect with our faith. That's how we connect with um, things that bring us personal development. So I had shared earlier with the young people that the general surgeon just came out with a study last year about the largest epidemic in the United States, particularly with youth, is loneliness. Um, and this is when we talk about mental health, it's almost like the source of a lot of the mental health issues that are a lot of our families are going through. And when you actually look into the details of the study, it's really interesting. It says like being lonely is equivalent to smoking 15 cigarettes a day. Like that's how bad it is. Like it actually shortens your lifespan, right? And we know that in the Sira, or in our tradition, our Islamic tradition, when we talk about lifespan or life expectancy, right? What does the Prophet ﷺ teach us? He says that silat al-rahim, or connecting with family members, keeping the kinship ties, right, extends our life. This is in our tradition. This is in our Islamic tradition. And I don't think that that is something that's haphazard in our tradition. If the general surgeon says that it shortens your lifespan, then we kind of already knew that. Why? Because we are tribal human being, we're tribal creatures, and human beings need to feel that collectiveness to feel healthy mentally and psychologically. So that kind of brings me to storytelling. How do you connect with people? You connect with people through stories. You share your own story, they share, other people share theirs. And then we even connect with the stories of the prophets and the stories of the companions and all of the various like parables and metaphors that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gives us in the Quran, helps us understand who we are as human beings in this world and in this short life that we are living in, and how to connect with other people. So I feel like storytelling is kind of the essence of psychotherapy. And it resonates very well with many of our cultures. Like, look at our hadith. Our hadith is oral tradition, right? We pass on like stories from one generation to the next. So it's really important that we kind of perpetuate that kind of that culture.
Jazakallah khairan, Sister Duaa, for
Yeah.
sharing that. We often hear from our scholars to engage in solitude in Ramadan, especially the last 10 nights. What is the difference between loneliness and solitude, and how do we find that balance?
That's a really good question. Um, so I think there does need to be a balance because solitude, you do need a little bit of alone time with your creator. Like, this is what the Prophet ﷺ did when he went to Ghar Hira, right? To be able to kind of fill our cup, to kind of be introspective, to help kind of center us on what is important to us. Because a lot of what happens in the daily, like, like everyday life, there's a lot of noise. There's a lot of noise, and it kind of shifts our perspective on what is really important. So there does have to be like times of solitude, times of hibernation, that in that sense there does need to be some growth, like in the story of Yusuf alayhi salam, right? He was in prison for how many years? How much did that help him grow in terms of his personal development? The Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, in Ghar Hira, Maryam radiallahu anha, right, like, or alayhi salam, like, she had moments of solitude where the angels would bring her, sustenance, right? These are all really good for our soul. However, we're not like other faiths. We're not like monks. In our Islamic tradition, we have to be a part of a jama'ah. We have to be a part of a group, and this is very important in the way that we grow and improve our personal development. I had mentioned in the other youth lecture, there are like certain aspects of our deen that are incorporated into our framework that ensures that we are a part of a community, right? So when someone is sick, it's a right of the Muslim to go and visit the sick, right? Not only that, not only do we go, we must visit the sick, we ask the sick person to make dua for us, right? Like, there's like a two-way street. There's a back and forth relationship between you and the sick one, right? When there's someone sitting on the road and you're passing by the one who's sitting on the road, the Islamic tradition is the person who's sitting is supposed to say salam to the person who's passing by. When someone invites you for an invitation or a wedding, you're supposed to accept the invitation unless you have something that's important that you can't, go to. There's when we sneeze, we say alhamdulillah, and then we're expecting the person to say yarhamukumullah, and then we say yahdikumullah wa yuslih balakum. There's human relationships happening, there's connections happening, and this is very good for the mental health of human beings and individuals. But even, in the Quran, we talk about bunyanum marsus, right? Like, the Muslims are like bricks in a building, in a pillar, pillars in a building, that we create this community by relying on one another. We know the hadith of the Prophet ﷺ that says that we are like one body. When one part is ailing, then the whole body goes into fever, right? This is why we care about the ummah. We care about what's happening overseas. It doesn't matter, even if it's not here in the United States, we care about it because this is a part of our tradition, that we have to be a part of this collectiveness and this community. So I think, it's hard to say for sure. It really depends on the person individually in terms of how much solitude do you need, and how much, like, collectiveness or connection that you need. It really depends on the person's personality and how much noise they have in their life. But it takes a little bit of introspection and acknowledgement that we need a little bit of both.
Yep, very true. I think Ramadan is definitely a time of community, right?
Mhm.
And collectivism, and that's inshallah coming up very soon. I wanted to ask your sister Dua, you can see there's like a diverse group in here,
Mhm.
in the sense that there's probably parents, maybe some teens, maybe some elderly, high school, college students, young adults. And in the spirit of talking about Ramadan and mental health, can you give us some tips or advice on how to maintain a strong spiritual focus during Ramadan while also managing all the commitments that we all have, like school and work?
Yeah. I feel like that's a trick question.
Yeah.
I feel like it's a trick question because I have a hard time separating like spiritual health and what we kind of go through in our everyday life, because Islam in essence, إنما الأعمال بالنيات, right? Everything is with intention. Everything could be worship. Like separating like worship from spirituality, like I feel like is a very Western concept.
Mm.
It's like intertwined in the Islamic framework. In the Islamic framework, if you are eating with the intention of having a healthy body and taking care of your family, then it's going to count as worship, right? If you're exercising to take care of the amana or the trust that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gave you, it's worship, right? It's spiritual worship. If you're doing your homework or you're studying for an exam or you're cooking for your family or you're going out and earning money, that if you have the right intention that this is for the sake of Allah, this is my, my responsibility to take care of the people that are relying on me on this earth, that's worship. And Islam is so beautiful in that sense, is that everything can count. Everything can count as a reward as long as we like make it something that's intended for that, right? So I don't want to separate it because sometimes people feel like, oh, Ramadan is here. I really have to like up my game and I have to like, read. I'm not discounting that. Those are really important things, but I'll get to that also. I have to do this in Ramadan. I have to do that. But really, the ayah in the Quran talks about يا أيها الذين آمنوا كتب عليكم الصيام كما كتب على الذين من قبلكم لعلكم تتقون. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wrote for us fasting and wrote for us Ramadan. Why? So that we can become God conscious. God conscious means being aware of Allah, right? It's not like a very specific regiment because there are people, we live in a non Muslim society, and there are people who have schedules that don't allow for them to stay up the whole night, right? They have to go to work really early. Or maybe there are parents who are taking care of young children, and it's really difficult for them to do the typical masjid going things, right? I'm not discounting those things. Those things are really important, but I also want to make sure that I'm showing the mercy, or I'm highlighting the mercy of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, that all of the above can be counted as worship. And there's nothing specific. I was listening to a lecture by Dr. Umar Sulaiman that I thought was really beautiful. And he said that Ramadan was only mentioned in the Quran once. And there's nothing really specific about this, this month in terms of worship, like other faiths. It's just an up the ante. It's upping what we normally do throughout the year. But there isn't like a specific salah or a specific dua. Even tarawih, we call it tarawih, but tarawih is basically qiyam al-layl. We can do that the rest of the year, right? And we can fast the rest of the year, all of those things. But if we want to be a little bit more specific, like how can you get more introspective and more mindful in our spiritual practices? Yes, we should have something where we put a plan for ourselves to read a little bit more Quran, to connect with the word of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, with the intention that it's going to improve our character, with the intention that we're coming into Ramadan improving our relationships with other people. The Sahaba, when they used to, I think it was Abdullah ibn Mas'ud, they used to say, what's the one thing that you have to make sure that you do before Ramadan? Like you watch all these like reels, right? And it's like, I'm gonna decorate the house and I'm gonna make the special foods and I'm gonna put the tablecloths, right? Like that's what we watch, right? But the Sahaba said, what we do before Ramadan is that we make sure that we're not holding any grudges against anybody. We forgive people before Ramadan, right? That's the essence of what Ramadan is about. It's about relationships. And going back again to what we were talking about earlier, the collectiveness of us as a community is really important. So that's the essence. Are you improving your relationships with Allah and with other people by reading the Quran? Right? It's not about I just got to get through these pages and finish the Quran. No, am I being introspective and understanding, what is this trying to tell me? How can I improve my quality, the quality of life and the relationships that I have with other people? It, when I pray in the middle of the night, am I praying in the middle of the night because I'm opening my heart to the creator so he can help me be a better person? Those are kind of like the essence of what Ramadan is supposed to be about, and to carve out some time based on your life season, right? Like this spiritual, it's really important that we pay attention to the life season, because a college student is going to have a very different schedule than a mom of young children. It's going to have a very different schedule than someone who's working in the ER, for example, right? All of them are going to have different schedules. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is so generous and so merciful and so forgiving that maybe the 2 rak'ahs that the mom with young children is praying in the middle of the night, maybe she didn't pray 20 rak'ahs in the masjid, but that's all she really could do. That's all in her time that she could do. That it could count a whole lot more than someone who might have prayed at the masjid and it's just because that's what we do, right? Because it's all about intention.
Very true, very true. I think it's a good reminder to uh, cleanse your intention, right? And there can be barakah in every action if we intend it. I think a lot of people forget that, including me. So I think that's a really good reminder. I want to ask, relatedly, I know you said that people struggle with a lot of different things during Ramadan, and how can we as family members develop some understanding and empathy with our family members that are struggling, right? So for example, a parent who has a young child is struggling to pray all 5 prayers, or to fast, or to wake up for fajr, versus like, even as a teen or a young adult, our mom is so stressed because she's constantly cooking. Do you know what I'm saying? So there's so many different roles. How can we all develop more understanding and empathy towards each other in our family unit? Because I think we spend so much time with our family during Ramadan.
Yeah. I think we live in a culture and a society that that puts perfectionism on a pedestal. Like we all have to be so super perfect, right? Like um in everything. Did you decorate your house because of Ramadan? Did you make the best meals, like like 5 course meals? Did you pray your 21 rak'ahs at the masjid? Do you just this idea of comparison to how other people are experiencing Ramadan, but also like we have to achieve at all costs, right? Not really thinking of really the essence of what we're trying to achieve, right? There was a Bedouin who approached the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and he was somewhat like embarrassed, telling the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, I can't make the fancy du'as that you and the companions make, right? And so the Prophet ﷺ asked him, he said, well, what du'a do you make? And he says, I just pray that Allah gives me Jannah and saves me from the hellfire. And the Prophet ﷺ said, حَوْلَهَا نُدَنْدِنْ. What that means is that's basically what we're all, making noise about or dancing around, right? Everything, it revolves around this essence. And this man who didn't have the words to say the dua, he is still achieving the same thing, right? He's still achieving the same thing. And that is the beauty of Islam. It's not complicated. It's not complicated to come close to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, but we make it complicated. We make it so difficult and hard. And this phenomenon of young people, or even not just young people, converts, or people who they feel unmasked, they feel like they can't belong in the Muslim spaces because we make it so incredibly difficult to practice faith and to come close to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And when we talk about mental health, perfectionism is very bad for our mental health because it's unachievable. Only Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is perfect. We can never reach perfection. We can never reach perfection. There's um uh there's a story of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. He's passing by the masjid and there's a rope hanging from the wall, and he's asking, what is this rope? And they said, oh, it's for when Zainab gets tired when she's praying, she holds on to this rope. And the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam said, if you get tired, then sit. Then end the salah, make it shorter. The Prophet ﷺ teaches us that when he's praying and there's somebody who is an imam, if you hear children crying in the background, that you're supposed to shorten your salah. We're like, no, we have to pray long prayers. We have to make our children strong and learn the deen, all this. This is not the essence of our faith. It's not the essence of our faith. Another story, I love stories. So another story is of a man who used to recite Surah Al-Ikhlas in every rak'ah of his salah. And the companions would somewhat get irked or annoyed. And they would say a different surah, like, why you keep repeating the surah? So the Prophet ﷺ asked this man and asked him, he said to him, he asked him, why do you keep saying Surah Al-Ikhlas? And he says, the man says, because it has the attributes of Allah and I love reminding myself of the attributes of Allah. And then Allah, because I love it. And the Prophet ﷺ says, then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala also loves you. And he, this is Jannah. But this, he grants him Jannah. This is the essence of what we talk about when we talk about this. We're not looking for perfectionism, but we're also not looking for, I said this in the last youth lecture, good enoughism. We're not like, yeah, I'm good, like, as long as I'm good, without any type of goal setting or trying to improve yourself, right? As-sabiqun, as-sabiqun. Islam tells us to compete in goodness. Umar ibn al-Khattab used to try to copy Abu Bakr in everything, watch him, see, whether it's sadaqah or seeing what he does, because he wanted to do as good and be as good as Abu Bakr. So it's important for us to set goals for ourselves and to have some type of accountability. But accountability is different than self-blame. There's healthy guilt and there's shame. Shame is when you think of yourself as, oh, I'm such a bad person because I don't do XYZ. That's not healthy. From a mental health perspective, from a psychological perspective, that's not healthy. But healthy guilt is when we feel bad that we might have done something wrong or we could have done better. So then it motivates us to do better and to improve and to put for ourselves goals where we're being a better version of our last self. We're not comparing ourselves to other people necessarily or social media. We're comparing ourselves to our previous self. Am I doing better this Ramadan than I did last Ramadan? Am I doing better in this life season than my last Ramadan in this life season? Because I'm not going to compare myself as a mom of little babies and me as a college student. It's just not fair, right? But also to take into consideration that a lot of people might be going through mental health issues. There's a spectrum when we talk about mental health. So some young people or adults even are going through have eating disorders, and sometimes fasting in Ramadan triggers a lot of that. A lot of those feelings that are related, those negative thoughts that are related to eating disorders, and might push them into that direction, relapse. So it's important as parents and as mentors to take that into consideration. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is not looking to punish us in Ramadan, right? He's not looking to punish us. He's trying to get us to fill our spiritual cups. When we talk about taqwa and God consciousness, it's like staying away from the things that bring us down, that bring our awareness down from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Again, it's when we talk about the difference between perfectionism and good enoughism, Islam takes the middle path of ihsan. When we talk about ihsan, it's a perpetual journey of making sure that we're getting better within the circumstances that we live in. So if I have anxiety or I'm dealing with depression or I have an eating disorder, then there's only so much that I can do. For example, like dysregulated, not having enough sleep in Ramadan can make people extremely dysregulated. So that means sleep is really important. So taking those things into consideration from a mental health perspective is really important. I know that was a really long-winded answer, but yeah, alhamdulillah.
When it comes to seeking perfection, Allah says in the famous Ramadan ayah, يُرِيدُ اللَّهُ بِكُمُ الْيُسْرَ.
Yeah.
Allah wants ease for you. وَلَا يُرِيدُ بِكُمُ الْعُسْرَ. Allah doesn't want to make things difficult. Meaning the salah, the zakat, the fast, going for umrah, it it's not going to be easy like doing that, but it should feel natural doing it. We should want to do it. As long as we understand the inner dimensions of those acts of ibadah, then we will want to do those acts of ibadah. And when we're making goals, as Sister Duaa was mentioning goals, we start off with that which is fard, and we stay away from that which is haram. That's how we start off the goals, right? And then we move to wajib, and we try to stay away from that which is makruh tahrimi. And then we try to do that which is sunnah muakkada and stay away from makruh tanzihi. That is a way that scholars recommend when we're setting our goals. Um, and goal setting is extremely important. None of us want to be average. All of us, want to reach the level of ihsan. Um, writing it out. Scholars and psychologists mention that it can help you achieve your goals, and we want to have these goals that we may not be able to reach them, but as long as we are more God conscious as we are achieving those goals, inshallah, will be a success. And
Yeah.
I like that Sister Duha kept on mentioning the word journey. Journey. It's a journey. We don't worship Ramadan, we worship the Lord of Ramadan.
Mm. Yeah. You know, subhanAllah, in Islam, building on what you were sharing, Imam, Allah gives us exemptions for a reason, like rukhas, right? Like Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says that the pregnant and the nursing and the sick and the traveling don't need to fast in Ramadan. This is the beauty of our religion, right? The beauty of, like, I think about traveling, people are like, well, what's the big deal with traveling? Traveling is mashaqqa, traveling is difficult, right? If that is okay, then imagine someone who might be going through depression or need to take medication or those type of things. Sometimes we feel very guilty that we have to do those things, but Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala likes those who take his exemptions. He likes the ones who take his rukhas, right? Like, this is what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala he likes. And even like, like women who are going through their cycle, sometimes they feel so bad or they feel like not spiritually connected because they're not doing what everybody else is doing. And I'll share with you, I went one year on a trip to Umrah, and I subhanallah, I spent money and I was ready for this trip. I was so excited, to meet Allah and to make my du'as and really, make tawaf around the Kaaba. And subhanallah, the day right before I, went to go see the Kaaba, I got my cycle and I cried. I felt so bad. And then I remembered, subhanallah, that you take reward by even just looking at the Kaaba. And it requires us to have a shift in perspective whenever there is something like we're sick or we're ill or we can't fast or we can't go to Tarawih or for whatever reason, right? A shift in perspective of how else does Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala want me to worship him? Let me think about this here, right? Maybe Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in that moment, maybe I was going to be so overwhelmed with the logistics of Umrah, and He just wanted me to sit down and look at the Kaaba and just the entire time just make dua. And when you make that shift in perspective, it changes you. Like, when you're applying for colleges or you're applying for a job, what do they look for? They look for well rounded individuals, right? So I like to think that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wants us to be well rounded in our connection with Him, in our worship with Him. Not just one way, the way that everybody else is doing, but He closes some doors and opens some other doors so that you can kind of find your way to Allah in whatever circumstance and in whatever hardship and in whatever situation you're in. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala does that so that at the end of this journey, when we meet Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, we can say, I did it all the ways, Ya Allah. None of the ways stopped me from coming to you. I did it all the ways. And it's something to be proud of and something to have at like a feeling like gratitude, a feeling of gratitude that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gave us that avenue to worship Him.
So much, Sister Duha. May Allah Ta'ala make us well-rounded individuals.
Ameen.
Anusha, you mentioned in the beginning of your question that
Mhm.
families usually spend a lot of time in Ramadan, but that's not true for two groups of people: one inmates and two imams.
Subhanallah.
One imam shared with me that the first time he had iftar with his family was during COVID.
Ya Allah.
Last year, another imam shared with me that he was receiving so many questions after the salah. When he went to Qaylula, he went to sleep, and then he was receiving questions from the community members in his sleep.
Mm.
And then he said to the community when he came back for Asr, those of you who ask me questions in my sleep, you cannot ask me questions in front of them.
That makes sense, Imam.
I would add converts to that list too. Yeah. And I think um that's another path to worship and reward in Ramadan is reach out to the people who don't have those families and connections. Yeah.
True. Or
SubhanAllah.
giving grace to the Imam of the
Yes.
community. Or
Yes.
the
Maybe
leader.
everybody needs to bring food for the imam, bring the families of the imam.
That's funny. No, definitely. I think that's an important point to give grace to the leaders of our community because I think they do a
Yeah,
lot, especially
subhanAllah,
our
may Allah
Hufaz
reward
that
them.
are leading Tarawih.
May Allah reward
Um,
them. Ameen.
Ameen, ameen. So what I'm getting from both of you is striving for perfection is unrealistic, right? So create more realistic goals during
Yeah.
Ramadan and don't beat yourself up, but also hold yourself to standards as we should in Ramadan, inshallah. I know, Sister Dua, you brought up this point about regulation, emotional, I think physical regulation you were referring to,
Yeah.
that sleep is very important, right? So be mindful of your sleep. Can you talk a little bit more about what role emotional regulation plays in maintaining a peaceful mind and heart during Ramadan? And also define, I guess, emotional regulation for those of who don't know what I'm talking about when I say that.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. So I'm not really sure where everybody is on the understanding of emotional regulation. And honestly, I don't really like the word regulation.
We use it a lot though.
I know, subhanAllah. Because I really believe that there should be some level of acceptance of the spectrum of our emotions. I think when I think of the body that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gave us as an amana, there are some things that are we can't fully understand that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala allows the body to do to give us signs and allows the body to do so that we can understand ourselves better, and the world that are around us. And oftentimes, that's why I don't like the word regulation. Oftentimes what a lot of people do is they kind of shut the body up, or they don't listen to the body, and they're like, oh, you know, your body's really tired, your body has a headache, you get a headache, you do all these things. It's like, oh, let me take the Advil, right? Like, oh, why am I not doing this? And just really shutting the body instead of pausing for a second and saying, what is my body trying to tell me, right? Because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gave us our body as a gift. It's a vessel. Our souls are kind of, living in our body as rent, Gen Z's like to say rent free, right? So our souls live in this body, but our bodies give us cues on what we need, whether it's spiritually or emotionally or physically. It tells us, and we need to listen. So I think that listening to the spectrum of emotions, so whether it's we're sad or we're angry or we're happy or whatever it is, they all have meaning, they all have purpose, right? I think what the term is referring to is when these emotions kind of go out of hand and they become so extreme that it makes us dysfunctional in the sense that we can't do our everyday living, right? So for example, anger, you know we talk a lot about anger in our tradition, but anger has a purpose, right? Like when you're watching what's happening in Palestine, for example, and you're angry and you're upset, that moves you to change. It moves you to do something for against oppression, right? There's a purpose to that anger, and it's healthy, right? Not all anger is unhealthy, right? Sadness and grief helps us connect us with individuals, right? Like Maryam alayhi salam, when she conceived, and she had these very strong emotions. What did she say? يا ليتني مت قبل هذا وكنت ناسيا منسيا. I wish I was dead and nobody could remember me, right? She was, she had these strong emotions. Or Yaqub alayhi salam, right? إنما أشكو بثي وحزني إلى الله. When he was so upset that he lost Yusuf, he says, I'm so sad. I'm going to, complain to Allah. I'm going to tell Allah my worries. These emotions, there's a reason why Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala shares these snippets of emotions in the Quran. Like he could have just told us about the story of Maryam, and then Isa was born, and he could, but he didn't. He had to give us like a visualization, a representation of what it might feel like. That's why I love stories. That what it might feel like to be in that moment, and that those emotions serve a purpose. We need to hear it and listen to it, have a conversation with it. What are you trying to tell me? Maybe I'm burnt out. Maybe I'm giving too much to the community and not giving enough to my body and to myself, right? Maybe, you know maybe there's so many reasons why, right? When we talk about huzn and sadness, the Prophet ﷺ cried when he lost his son, right? And the companions asked, well, even you, ya Rasulullah, you're crying. And he says, my heart weeps, but I don't but I am still have rida for what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gave me, right? So I think in a lot of our cultures, we're almost afraid of emotion. It's like, oh no, no, don't be sad. Why are you crying? Don't be sad, right? Like, and sometimes it's gender specific. Like if boys cry, oh no, 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 right? If girls are angry, oh, what's wrong with her, right? Like we almost we attribute certain emotions for certain genders to be acceptable, right? And sometimes in our cultures, we don't accept emotion at all, right? We don't allow for emotion at all. And that's totally unhealthy. That's totally unhealthy because when you bottle up your emotions in your body, it's going to manifest itself in some way. And when we talk about psychosocial symptoms, physiological symptoms, these are manifested because it's like stuck in our systems and in our bodies, and we didn't allow for it to be released and processed in a healthy manner, right? And that's not our way. That's not the Islamic way. If the Quran can mention those different, can acknowledge those different emotions, then we should be able to acknowledge those emotions as well. Okay. Now, if you want to use the word regulation, when it comes to an extreme where you're you're oppressing someone, or you're taking over the rights of someone because you're angry, like you slander someone or you insult someone, that's where Islam draws the line, right? Islam draws the line when you're taking the haqq of other people, or taking the haqq of yourself or your families, right? That's where Islam draws the line. Then Islam says, okay, you need to be introspective here and really figure out what's going on here. Now, in psychotherapy, that um, healthy introspection is where there's a saying where we say all parts are welcome. When we say all parts are welcome, what that means is we don't judge and criticize the parts that really want to be angry or really want to be sad. We kind of are curious. We ask that part, why are you angry? Where does this come from? Why are you sad? Right? It could be a legacy burden. It could be something that maybe your family has passed down from generations, that you can't be angry. And then all of a sudden you had a volcano eruption because you never really got a chance to be angry. And so if you go to the deep root of why you're angry, maybe there's a childhood story that you need to process and you need to work through, right? And when we can do that, that's how we can when we talk about intergenerational trauma, that's how we stop the trauma from being perpetuated to the next generation. When we become curious and we acknowledge where these emotions are coming from, and we address it in a way that it is not taking over the rights of other people and the environments that we're in, but an acknowledgement that allows us to be internally healthy.
Thank you so much, sister. That was powerful. May Allah allow us to listen to our bodies especially this blessed month of Ramadan. One of the barakas of Ramadan is that it also shows us that we are more powerful than we think. How many of us can survive? It's like Umrah, right? How many of us can survive in Ramadan on just 5, 6 hours of sleep? I'm not saying don't, get any sleep, but alhamdulillah, we're able to do more with less. When I talk with all of us, when we talk with our non-Muslim friends, they say, "You're not eating from dawn till sunset." Right? How do you survive? All of them say that, right? So Allah gives us more power than we think, but it goes back to the intention. As long as we do it for the sake of Allah, and we want to reach the level of ihsan, the level of being able to know that Allah is watching me, then inshallah Allah will make certain things that we thought were impossible possible.
I really like this idea of potential. Really, really like this idea of potential. But I think there's a part of us that we don't recognize how powerful our bodies are, right? And we ignore the intuition, right? Like I really like this hadith of the Prophet ﷺ that says, "Al-ithmu ma haka fi sadrika wa karihta an yattali alayhi nas." The sin is the thing that you feel friction in your heart and you're afraid that people are going to know about it. I know people use this hadith for different reasons, but I really like it because that means we have intuition. We can feel it. We can feel when we're doing something right or wrong. You know, there's a gut feeling. You know how people say, "I got this gut feeling." It's so real. It's so real, and Islam teaches us that it's real. But sometimes the illusion of the world makes us forget how much potential our bodies really do have. And Ramadan's the chance to really figure it out.
That's very true. I don't think this is a concept that's discussed in Muslim communities enough. Like listening to your body. It's talked about a lot in mental health.
Yeah.
But that's a good point. I'm thinking of like the moms in Ramadan that are constantly like cooking and like pushing themselves over to like get food on the table instead of just asking for help, right? From the husband or the kids. If you're tired, it's okay to slow down, right, and listen to that and ask for help that one day, or tell your family, "Hey guys, I can't cook today," right? Order food, order healthy food.
Yeah. Giving grace. SubhanAllah.
Exactly. Yeah, I'm sure, and vice versa. I'm sure the dads are also going through struggles. So to give every family member grace, right?
Yeah. SubhanAllah. SubhanAllah.
So in the context of talking about parents, right, and parenthood, I think this question is a bit more from the lens of a parent and maybe a bit more specific. I think you've already talked about this a little bit, but if you could give us some specific tips of how parents can encourage their young children, adult children, who are struggling with the demands of fasting, maybe because of school or like difficult work schedules, other pressures. How can they offer support to their children, young or old?
Yeah. Yeah. It depends on age. Age makes a really big difference. But if I was to talk about our subconscious parts of our brain,
Can you explain what that means?
yeah, what that means is it's the part of our brain, it's kind of like the reptile part of the brain that does things automatically without us really having to think about it. So you when you sneeze, you close your eyes, things like just really like inadvertent. You don't have to really put some thought into it happening. But there are certain patterns that our body or our minds like to do because of history or a memory that's tucked away somewhere in our brains that makes us think a certain way or act a certain way based on our history. So I'll give you an example. When I smell crayons, I feel good. And I know that sounds kind of bad, but like what was crayons? But like kindergarten was a really good experience for me. So, and I remember the first box of crayons that my mom bought me, right? And so it's like a smell that is associated with a very good feeling and an important part of my life that has a good memory to it. So now every single time I smell crayons, I'm like, oh, it smells so good, right? That's just so amazing.
Maybe instead of the honorarium, we should just give you crayons.
That would be great. A nice 64 crayon box with the sharpener in the back. I don't know if they make those anymore. But really, subhanallah, like different things like car washes. So I have immigrant parents, and my parents thought it was such a waste of money to go to a car wash. Like we had to wash, like we take out the bucket and everybody washes the car and vacuums the inside of the car. What do you mean? We're not gonna waste money to go to a car wash, right? But my mom, every so often, as a treat, she would take us, me and my siblings, in the back of the car, and we would drive through the car wash. And it seems such a simple thing, like such a simple thing. But now, as an adult in my 40s, right? When I want to calm myself down, I know this sounds really ridiculous. I will drive through the car wash, and I think the car wash guy thinks I'm crazy because sometimes I'll drive twice. And I'll just sit in the car and look at the bristles and smell the little shampoo and the colors, and it just feels so comforting. But it's just a car wash. But there was some association with that car wash when we were young. It was a treat. It was something special. It was, you know, um, I have a journal where I list my favorite things, and car washes are on that list. Yeah, it seems so strange, but it's a memory that is associated with something so positive, right? And so, why am I saying this whole story? Because if you want your children to associate Ramadan with positive things for the rest of their life, make good memories and use as many senses as you can. When they're younger, what are some smells that they can associate with Ramadan and fasting? Can you play certain anashid or music that reminds them of Ramadan? People say, well, why do we have to decorate? Because there's just a sense of the decorations, the lights or whatever. There's these positive memories, and they might seem like something so simple and so mundane, but they're subconscious. That part of their brain, there's a part of your brain that stores the memories and tucks it there for a while, and then it pops up again, and you're like, wait, why does that feel really good, right? Or why does that feel really bad? There's a lot of bad memories that we have tucked away in our subconscious too, right? Um, and there's, even in psychology, we talk about things called legacy burdens and legacy gifts. When we talk about legacy burdens, there are things, maybe your family went through a war, and maybe you don't even know anything about that war. Maybe you never really experienced that war, but those burdens are oftentimes carried from generation to generation in the way that people manifest doing certain things. So, like, why did my mom like store every single jar that we bought, or like, like, to keep things in? Because when you move to a new country and you take care, you have to make sure that you have to make ends meet. You have to make sure that you're taking care of your family, right? So you never waste ever, right? And when we're growing up, we're like, why do we need 500 pickle jars in the kitchen? Like, who cares, right? Like, that's, but when you understand where that's coming from, right, you can acknowledge why this is the way that it is, right? So going back to this positive associations and positive memories, make everything, like, tweak it so it's a memory. Tweak it so it's a memory. So when you're sitting down and reading Quran, make a special Quran time with your teenagers, with your young children. Sit with them, touch them, make something nice smelling, maybe put a treat, right? Maybe there's some gifts. Okay, everybody, when we read Quran, there's a gift jar or a gift basket, right? Because they're going to remember that. They're going to remember it as something positive, right? They're going to remember. And so it's important for you to do those things. And the Prophet ﷺ used to do that, right? When I think it was Abdullah ibn Mas'ud, I'm not sure, but one of the companions, when the Prophet ﷺ was teaching him to say Subhanallah after Salah, he would hold his hand and he would show him how to say tasbih. He'd teach him the dua, Allahumma a'inni ala dhikrika wa shukrika wa husna ibadatik, right? He would hold his hand as he was doing it, so he felt special to him, right? when Amr al-Shurayyid, he was known for his poetry. He's a young man, he's a teenager, he was known for his poetry. The Prophet ﷺ wanted him to stick to good poetry, not the lewd, inappropriate poetry. So he asked him to come and sit with him on the camel, and he had behind him on the camel and recite for him 100 lines of poetry. Right? Can you imagine 100 lines of poetry? That's a lot. I mean, if my daughters showed me like 5 minutes of their music, I'd be like, that's enough. You know, like really. So the Prophet ﷺ is listening, and then he gives the Prophet ﷺ gives him advice, and he says to him, it is best that you stick to Umayyah ibn Salt's poetry, because Umayyah ibn Salt's poetry was clean. So he's giving him advice, and this is part of parenting, is connection before correction, right? And so when you're doing all of these things in Ramadan, you're having a Quran time, you're giving them gifts when they do certain dhikr or certain, when they fast, right? When you make it a thing after Taraweeh to go get ice cream or to go stop at Speedway and get their favorite snacks, you might think those are just, not important things, but those are important things because it stays in their subconscious. And then when they grow older, they just feel like, I love Ramadan. And even when you ask them, well, why do you like Ramadan? I don't know, but I just love Ramadan, right? Because you did that. You helped them reach that point. SubhanAllah.
Can I ask you, maybe expand on? I know you talked a lot about teens and children, young children.
Yeah.
How about parents who really didn't have time for that,
Yeah.
and now their teenagers are young adults, like in their 20s,
Yeah.
later 20s, early 20s, and
Yeah.
they're living with them now.
Yeah. It's never too late to connect with your children, no matter how old they are. It's never too late. SubhanAllah. You have to be creative. What are some things that they like to talk about or they like to connect with? Like my daughter, she's moved out already, but she'll call me. She's like, Mom, can you tell me about the recipe of how to make this one food? And she never really cared for that. But now that she's living on her own, she wants to know how to make this food and that food, whatever. That's a point of connection. I could sit down and be like, oh yeah, you could do this, you put the garlic and you do this. And we underestimate the power of food when it comes to connection and moving that love from one generation to another. Like even like certain drinks or herbal remedies like that we think is like, oh, it's like an old wives tale or something. It has value. When we talk about things like sage, maramiya, or na'na, when we talk about mint and the things that people make with it or the drinks that people make with it, there's value and healing in those type of things. So for young adults, find what interests them or ask them. Ask them, say, okay, and be honest with them. You can be level with them. You can be like, you know what? I really want to build a relationship with you this Ramadan. That's my goal. And remember, because we said that at the very beginning, worship can be anything. And building a relationship with your young adult, it can be worship. It'll count as reward. It might be just as important as praying Taraweeh, right? I really want to connect with you this Ramadan. What can we do together? What would you like to do? And it could be something so simple. You want to drink tea together? You want to do adhkar together? Whatever it is. You want to go for a drive and okay, now it's snowing, but go and look at the trees, drive through the trees, whatever it is, right? Those are things that you can build, but it's never too late. It's never too late.
I appreciate that.
I noticed with the 4 to 7 year olds, they mentioned when I asked them, how many of you are excited to fast? And 90% of them say, I want to fast. I want to fast. But when you ask that same question with middle school students, high school students, they're not as excited.
Yeah.
You hit a few points that we should try to make connections with them, make positive connections. Is there anything else that you think that as parents they should know to make them love the fast as they once did?
Yeah. So there's a lot of factors that come into play as they get older. One is physiologically, they're probably really hungry because their bodies are changing and they just need food. And they're grazers, right? Like it's hard for them to just sit down and not eat and then eat. So there's a physiological aspect to it, but there's also an identity aspect to it. So I don't know if they're going to a school that's predominantly non-Muslim or if it is Muslim, but if it is non-Muslim, that they could be very self-conscious about fasting. Like maybe, why are you not eating? Like why are you the only one that's not eating? Not even water, that's what people say all the time, right? So sometimes it's a burden for them because they're like, oh, I don't want to explain myself, or why am I so different? And there's like this grudge, right? Like this of, why do I have to be different in everything, right? And I'm not saying that that's the reason, but there's so many factors that come into play. Sometimes with older teenagers, uh, there's the influence of social media and comparisons of what a happy life is supposed to look like, and fasting isn't on the radar of what happiness is, right? Because it's not there's no instant gratification, and it's just really difficult when you've spent the entire year with all these gratifying things, and then the moment that you do this one thing, then it becomes extremely hard, right? um, Especially like young kids, when we talk about 4 to 7 year olds, parents and mentors and teachers are like on a pedestal, like, wow, they're just great, and anything that they do is amazing, right? But when you become a middle schooler and you become a teenager, you're not so great, like um and that's why, if we understand human development, that's why when kids get older, we know that there's already going to be a shift of who they're willing to listen to and who they're willing to take advice to. And I'm telling you right now, it's not you as a parent. It doesn't matter how amazing your kids are and what your relationship is like with your kids. It's a part of them growing up. It's how they become independent. They're not going to think you're amazing. And so your job as a parent is to create that village, is to create that environment where there are other aunties and khalas and ammus and all these people that are in the community, that if they don't want to listen to it from you, they're going to go listen to her, and she's going to say the exact same thing you did, but if she said it, it's fine, right? She said it, it's fine. And so that should be your mindset, because you already know that that's going to happen, that you create this village. And when I spoke to the younger group earlier, and we talked about how can we motivate ourselves, part of it is just like you are kind of setting the tone and creating that village for them subtly. Do it subtly, because if you do it, like, obviously they'll be like, mom, I don't want to go there, right? So make it subtly, but it's also a part of their development to figure out, who are my people, what's my space, what do I want to feel like in that space? Because when they create those spaces for themselves, and they have the mentorship and they have the village that they need, when they go to those spaces, the non-Muslim spaces, for example, where fasting isn't cool, praying isn't cool, wearing hijab isn't cool, right? They can be like, you know what? It's fine. Because when I go to my space, I feel great. I build myself in this space. And I'll go here and I'll be struggling and I'll try my best to do and it's gonna be hard, but I'm gonna go back to my safe space. And it gives them that springboard to continue with life. I mean, even us as adults, right? Like, we need a space, we need an environment to help remind us, because life is difficult. Life is so hard. Every single stage of our life has hardships. There's going to be something that hits you, whether it's illness, whether it's relationship issues, whether it's children, whether, financial difficulties, everything. This is how the dunya, this is what the dunya is about. The dunya is never perfect. It's always going to be filled with tests and hardship. So what is the thing that helps you get through those hardships? That village, the people that remind you of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the people that remind you of your faith, and the idea of what the Prophet ﷺ teaches us, that even if the whole world was to go against you, right? If Allah doesn't want it to happen, it's not going to happen. And for you to have that yaqeen, that conviction that in the end, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will take care of you. And that's the true meaning of tawakkul. Tawakkul is this feeling of, you know what, I know I'm going to have hardships. I know I'm going to have all of those things, but Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will take care of me in the end. Well, that was a really long answer to the fasting thing, but it really depends on the age and, the circumstance, and, really about that identity, building that identity so that they feel like fasting is really worth it. Nowadays they talk about intermittent fasting. Oh wow, intermittent fasting, such a cool thing, right? It is a cool thing, right? But there's all these buzzwords that people come up with, like intermittent fasting and all the yoga poses and all this, just all this stuff, right? And dude, we have all that stuff. Our religion, our deen has every bit of it, every part of it. We don't need to look elsewhere. I mean, al-hikmah dalatul mu'min, wisdom, the believer is supposed to find wisdom wherever we can. If intermittent fasting is great, then it's good. But sometimes we neglect, and I think this is where we need to bring our young people, those teenagers that are kind of like, I don't want to fast. We bring young people to the understanding is we have it. And to be strong enough in our identity where we feel like, all right, I know my deen has it, let me go look for it. Why do I do this? Why is it important? And we don't do things in Islam, we don't do things because we're trying to find the reason. It's because we know Allah prescribed it for us, and because we trust that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala knows what's good for us, we're going to do it anyways, even if we don't have a reason, because we trust that Allah wants the best for us.
Sister Duaa. I appreciate that answer. I think specifically the part about connection before correction is helpful. I wrote that down. I think it could be applied as a parent talking to their child, but also like talking to your like husband and wife as well.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. There's a saying, also a parenting saying, I think Dr. Laura Markham talked about this. She said, without quantity, there can be no quality. I really like that, because when we talk about creating positive memories for our children so that they love Ramadan, when we talk about creating positive identity, you can't just come once in a blue moon and decide to connect with your child and feel like, oh, why didn't she connect with me? And also relationships with husband and wife too. Like, you can't just have, it's the quantity needs to happen. It needs to be consistent. It needs to be often in order for you to get quality. So you can't just be like, okay, whenever I'm free. That's not how it works.
Very true. So now, inshallah, we'll open it up for questions from the community. We have passed around note cards and pens if you guys want to write a question. Taha is going to come collect them. If you're comfortable just raising your hand and asking, that's okay too, inshallah. Go ahead.
I have a question.
Sure.
A couple of brothers have come and asked me about this, and I was wondering if you give some advice. So these brothers, they're practicing Muslims, and the main issue that they're dealing with is not necessarily their kids, but it's actually their parents. So the parents, to give background, come from the old country, and they lived in a Muslim country.
Yeah.
But it didn't permeate in the same way that maybe a person that comes in America, and they kind of approach it, they want it to be a part of it. And oftentimes, maybe it was politicized and whatnot. So these elder generations didn't connect with the deen as much. And so they've come to me and asked me, like, how can we have a conversation as a child with my mom or dad who aren't practicing at the same level that I'm at? Because I've come to it kind of all myself. So how do I advise them with that? It's a difficult conversation.
It is. It is. I think you're on par with the youth group, but it was earlier because there was a question with the youth group that almost asked the same question, that what do I do when my parents are not at the same faith level as I am? Yeah. It is definitely a struggle for sure. But the Quran gives us an amazing example in Ibrahim, right? Like, his father was not a believer. He actually made the idols and worshiped them, right? And Ibrahim tried his best to call him to the faith, and alayhi salam, and he tried to call him to his faith, and his father was completely adamant about worshiping the way that he was supposed to worship. But in that conversation, what the Quran shows us is the way that Ibrahim talks to his father in every part of the conversation. He repeats it often. He says, "Ya abati." He says, "Oh my father, oh my dear father," right? Like, he talks to his father in a way that is so respectful, but also staying firm to his belief system, right? And we know the story of Mus'ab ibn Umair, who comes from a wealthy family, and he was handsome, and his mom used to tie him to the house and not let him go out because she didn't want him to learn about the faith. And at a certain point, Mus'ab ibn Umair had to leave his mom and leave the community that he grew up in. And I'm not necessarily saying that these young people are supposed to like draw the line and leave their families. I think they must attempt in the best way that they can to give da'wah. When we talk about da'wah and calling people to Islam, sometimes we think of it in the context of Muslim to non-Muslim. But actually, we should first start with, when we talk about sadaqah, when we talk about giving and relationship, we should first start with our immediate family, and to find a respectful way to be able to be like, well, with the ya abati at the beginning, I found that this way helps me bring me closer to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. I think that this way is more traditional, or this way is more, and to be kind of savvy in terms of how to do it. But that requires quite a bit of emotional strength to do that. I know, like, I'm saying that I'm not oblivious to the fact that that's very difficult to do. So what I was telling the young people in the last session was, you need to create for yourself a pocket and a space where you're almost like filling your cup, in terms of, because there's a little bit of grief there too, like, because your parents are supposed to be the ones that teach you deen, right? Or supposed to be the ones that show you the way. That's kind of like the feeling that we get, right? And so there's quite a bit of grief, like, how come it's flipped? How come it's not that way? Why do I have to be the one? And to be able to acknowledge that grief and say, where can I get that source of guidance that will fill my cup in that matter, and to recognize that this is my rizq. When we talk about rizq is not just monetary rizq, it's emotional, social capital rizq, right? There are people who have great Muslim friends and some people that don't. There are some people who have great Muslim parents and some people that don't. Some people who have great Muslim kids and some people that don't. But Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala um, teaches us that teaches us how to be well-rounded in connecting with him in all of these different versions of hardship, right? And maybe in this season of your life, this you have to be able to reach a point of acceptance, or this person that asked the question has to reach a point of acceptance that this is a part of my rizq, that I don't get to do that, and I'm going to try my best to guide them to Islam, but I'm going to get that guidance elsewhere, and to have rida and contentment of this rizq that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gave me.
We have two questions
Yeah.
anonymously. So
Sure.
someone shared that they lost their mom a year back before Ramadan, and since then they've been very sad during Ramadan. So their question is, how can I forget the grief and connect with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in Ramadan?
That's a really good question. So I'm going to hone in on the word forget. Forget the grief. We can never forget, especially someone that's very close to us. We can never forget. That's not how our mind works. That's not how emotionally we work. We don't forget. So there's I wish I could draw it for you on a board or something. But I want you to imagine the grief that you have is like a little ball, right? A little ball. The ball stays the same shape as you go through your life. Okay? What changes is the jar that you put the ball in. So maybe initially the jar was just the size of the ball, so the ball took up the whole entire jar space. So the grief feels very heavy, it takes so much space. But as you go through life and you go through different, your life continues, the jar gets a little bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger. And so your life grows around that grief. But the grief never shrinks. I think we have this idea or illusion that it'll go away, it'll dissipate, it'll I won't be sad anymore. There's always going to be things that will trigger. You remember when we were talking about subconscious? There will be just something so minor. I'll be like, that reminds me of my dad. That reminds me of my mom. That reminds me of so and so. That's a natural. That's what makes us human. And I don't think the goal is to try to forget. I don't think the goal is to try to not feel the grief like we talked about earlier. You have to feel it. It's important to feel it because you loved her. You loved your mom. She was important to you. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is not asking you to forget. Now, Ramadan being a trigger, I think it's important for us to kind of grow into it. Like, okay, acknowledge the grief that comes with Ramadan. Every Ramadan, and by the way, grief has this thing with holidays. because it reminds you of the people that you lost and the relationships and the emotions that you have with that with you in that time. Is try to remember the things that brought you closer to your mom in Ramadan. Don't run away from your mom's memories. Remind yourself of it. Sit with it. When I talk about emotions and what your body needs, sometimes you just have to sit with it. Just sit with it. Feel it. Journal it. Talk about it. Think, stare out into space and think about your mom. Think about what kinds of foods does she like and maybe make them. What kinds of actually do a deep dive of what it is. Like I remember my mom every time I go through the car wash, you know? So it's something that you have to feel. And when I talk about making the jar bigger is, are there any add-ons that you can add on to your Ramadan experience that creates a bigger jar? So live the experience, feel it, grieve it, be sad, really be a part of it, but also add on some new memories where the jar can get bigger.
Mm. I want to add on also, I think it's normal, right?
Yeah.
To grieve and be sad, especially at a parent loss.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
so,
It's so normal.
yeah.
And remember your mom or anyone who passed away in your dua, right? Ramadan is the best time to do it. You make dua for your loved one. You make your dua in sujood. Remember, one of the things for parents that stays kaching, right, after they die is the dua of their son or daughter, right? It's one of those sadaqah jariyas, right? It's one of the things that keep going. So don't lose that opportunity. Give that to your parent as a way to kind of give back to them after they've given you perhaps so much.
Definitely. So this will be the last question.
Yeah.
For younger kids that are ambitious and have different goals, how do you, as a parent, guide them for success without discouraging their faith? For example, my 9-year-old wants to fast all 30 days during her school days.
That's great, mashallah. I think this is a hard one because it really depends on the personality of your child and the physical makeup of your child. Are you genuinely afraid that your child is not going to make it and that's going to really be detrimental to their health? Then perhaps find a way where maybe you could do every other day or half days or some like a modification to whatever it is that they're, so you're not squashing their spirit. If you're really afraid about their physical health. If your kid is pretty strong and pretty resilient, let them do it. Let them do it. Why not? And just stock up. Make sure you give them good food when they break their fast, right? But you know your child best. If physically you feel like that's something that's really difficult for them to do and they'll just pass out, then try to modify. Say, can we do every other day? Can we do half days? Until you're ready to your body's strong enough to be able to reach this point, right? And even as a mom, sometimes what I say is like Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gives me a break once a month, to take a rest and to be able to eat and use that as an example. But I think it's just a balance and honesty in conversation. Another thing that I would say is usually when we talk about positive parenting, it's very difficult to take something away without putting something in its place. So let's say you say, let's do half days. Then expose your child to other options of worship. Like, did you know that Ramadan is also the month of charity? Like, let's do this. How about we do half a day of fasting and then we do some kind of charity every day. Like maybe you can make something for the neighbors, or maybe we could go work at the soup kitchen, or maybe you can give sadaqah in the masjid. So you're giving them also the perspective that Ramadan isn't just about fasting, or good deeds is not just about fasting. And there are good deeds, there's a repertoire of good deeds that you can do. It doesn't just have to look a certain way. So just kind of replacing maybe whatever you might be thinking of taking away with something else more positive.
Very true. All right. Well, Jazakallah khairan.
Jazakumullah
Thank you
khairan.
for coming.
I appreciate you having me and honoring me with your space. Jazakumullah
We
khairan.
really appreciate it. You gave a lot of helpful insight, I think, for a lot of us. If you don't mind, ending us in a dua before we close out.
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Oh Allah, please guide all those who are in this space to be good parents and good mentors for the youth in this community. Oh Allah, keep them steadfast in their deen. Oh Allah, please help them reach Ramadan with sincerity and forgiveness, Ya Allah. Oh Allah, give them this Ramadan filled with forgiveness, mercy, and protection from the hellfire. سبحانك اللهم بحمدك أشهد أن لا إله إلا أنت أستغفرك وأتوب إليك بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم والعصر إن الإنسان لفي خسر إلا الذين آمنوا وعملوا الصالحات وتواصوا بالحق وتواصوا بالصبر. جزاكم الله خيرا.
Jazakallah khair, everyone, for coming.
Thank you.
جزاك الله خيرا.
جزاكم الله خيرا.